At this moment inside the base of Radiant Prosperity Base, Xiao Honglian, who had been in a good mood ever since the war ended, was in thoughts with her arms leisurely folded. Xiao Honglian was a bit puzzled, wondering why Zhang Yi requested for the information about all the leaders of the major forces, even though none of them pose a threat to him anyway, especially Yuan Kongye and Zheng Yixian of the Snow Worship sect. And although she hadn't figured out why, she was sure Zhang Yi definitely had a motive. But at that very second, her thoughts was cut off by a call. A video call. Meng Siyu, in a rushed tone, told her that a wave of zombies was coming, so they were heading to her place right now to take refuge. Xiao Honglian needed to prepare with very little amount of time. After Xiao Honglian received the news, she jumped up from her chair, stunned. Didn't they say that the zombie problem has been solved? Why are you here again suddenly? And why do you want to seek refuge here? Xiao Honglian instinctively wanted to refuse, but when she thought of the Jiangnan region behind the investigation team, she could only grit her teeth and ask what was going on. However, her question was left unanswered as the video call abruptly ended, and by some coincidence, her right-hand man, Zhuge Qingting, came in at that precise moment with a report. Boss, production has resumed at the base. What are your plans for the future? Indeed, the base had resumed production, and the chimneys of the refinery were emitting black smoke. In an angry and rushed manner, Xiao Honglian, with a surprised look on her face, shouted at Zhuge Qingting, telling him to carry out her orders immediately. Notify everyone now and go back to the shelter immediately. A large-scale corpse tide is coming soon. Let them hide quickly. Quickly, quickly, quickly. Zhuge Qingting was stunned for a moment. Corpse tide, Xiao Honglian said impatiently. There is no time to explain to you, so do it now. Quickly. From Xiao Honglian's urgent tone, Zhuge Qingting saw the urgency of the situation and did not dare to ask any more questions. He hurried to the propaganda room to use the radio to notify everyone in the refinery to immediately retreat to the underground shelter. Meanwhile, at the shelter in Luck Manor, Zhang Yi, like the rest of the other forces, had received the news. Zhang Yi, we need your help now. The other teams have agreed to resist the zombie tide, and everyone is heading to the shelter at Radiant Prosperity Base. Zhang Yi responded calmly when he heard this. We'll be there soon. After learning that Bian Junwu and the others had fled to Radiant Prosperity Base, Zhang Yi knew that his plan had taken an expected turn he didn't wanted. This possibility, although expected, had a counter-plan in place. And he also didn't want Bian Junwu and the others to die, or for them to completely destroy the zombie tide. At least not yet. The investigation team and the zombie tide had a purpose to serve after all. And behind all this, the real enemy was definitely still conspiring with or without this current turn of events. Therefore, only by getting rid of them can all this come to an end. And Bian Junwu's power was indispensable and critical to this current plan of Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi stood up from the sofa and began to change to his combat uniform. Then he checked all the equipment on his body. After doing all this, he called Liang Yu, Chunlei, and Uncle Yu over. They didn't know the ins and outs of everything Zhang Yi had planned, but they were completely on board. Zhang Yi told them they were going to Radiant Prosperity Base to help the investigation team out. Although everyone was prepared, no one expected things to develop so quickly. They had just returned from the Snow Worship sect not long ago, and they were about to face a new round of turmoil. Don't worry too much. Everyone should stay close to me. Once the situation goes wrong, I will use my two-dimensional doors to quickly travel through space. Then, take you all and flee the battlefield to the shelter as soon as possible. Hearing this, they nodded in understanding, and the eyes of the three were indeed much more reassuring. Following a captain with top-notch life-saving methods had a huge benefit, and the sense of security was easily felt. It didn't matter whether they win or not, the most important thing is that they don't die. Zhang Yi then tells them to go gear up. He will inform Zhokir and the others. Zhang Yi quickly found Zhokir, who wanted to go with him this time also. But Zhang Yi told her what she and the others need to do in the meantime. Don't be idle at home. Put the most important things on you in order and pack them up in the living room. If there is any accident over there, we will come to pick you up as soon as possible. Don't bring too much things because we don't lack a lot of things. Each person can only have one package at most, remember? Several women in the family, who showed up at the scene at this moment, had a worried look on their faces. Zhokir replied that she understands and will fill the rest in about what to do. Yang Xinxin looked calm. She didn't have anything special to bring. Nothing more than a laptop. Brother, don't forget, that's our only chance. She reminded Zhang Yi with a stern look. Zhang Yi, with a similar look, turned his head slightly and nodded slowly. I understand. Until now, except for Zhang Yi and Yang Xinxin, no one else really understood how big the crisis they were facing this time. Before they could properly say their goodbyes, Liang Yu, Chunlei, and Uncle Yu came in with their equipment, geared up and ready to leave. "We are leaving. Please remember to prepare everything and wait for us in the living room." Zhang Yi patted Zhou Qi on the head when he said this. Then, they immediately set off to assist the investigation team at Radiant Prosperity Base. Zhou Qi stood at the window and watched them leave, feeling powerless. On the other side, at the camp of the Snow Worship Sect, when Zhang Yixian saw the message, his brows furrowed deeply. He then crossed the ruins and came to St. John's Cathedral, where he found Yuan Kongye praying. "Something happened," Zhang Yixian said directly. Yuan Kongye slowly opened her eyes and turned to look at Zhang Yixian. There was a wave of light in her cold eyes, with a touch of indifference that was not like that of a human, and piety to the gods. Zhang Yixian said word by word, "The matter in Aoshan District was discovered by the investigation team of Jiangnan District." When Yuan Kongye heard this, a touch of emotion appeared on her face. Jiangnan District, these 4 words are very deterrent to her. At least now, it is not an existence she is willing to face. Didn't they leave Tianhai City? Why did they appear in Aoshan? Aoshan District was very remote. After the end of the world, there was no one living there immediately after. It was almost a dead place. When the zombie crisis broke out, there was no zombie group active there. Therefore, they chose Aoshan District as the place to hide the zombie group. Even if the investigation team was very careful, they can't search the huge Tianhai City. That's why Yuan Kongye felt surprised. Zhang Yixian shook his head. "I don't know either. Logically speaking, even if they are searching, they will search around the 5 major forces. After all, these places are the most densely populated. So this is not good news." Yuan Kongye frowned slightly, not understanding whether all this was a coincidence or someone did it on purpose. Zhang Yixian said, "Now, the zombies have been alarmed and had started to attack the investigation team. They asked us to come over for support and had currently fled to the shelter at Radiant Prosperity Base." Yuan Kongye looked up at him. Could this be a trap? A trap to lure us over and then annihilate them in one fell swoop? Zhang Yixian was also unable to confirm. He said, "Only the Bloodvine can communicate with the white corpses. The information I got is that the zombies have indeed been disturbed." Yuan Kongye was silent. She lowered her head and thought, "Now, the remaining forces in Tianhai City are not enough to compete with me, but I am afraid of the power of those people in Jiangnan District, especially the power of Bian Zhenwu, the terrible power that destroys everything in sight. Even Yuan Kongye is deeply afraid of it now, but also covet it. This may be the reason why she gave an ice soul to Bian Zhenwu. And at present, she had absorbed 36 kinds of superpowers, but none of them can reach 1/10 of the destructive power of Nirvana. If we don't go, it will arouse their suspicion, right?" Yuan Kongye said lightly. Zhang Yixian thought about it and nodded in agreement. "You are right, we should go there. But I only need to go there. You can stay here, and even if there is an accident, you will be fine." He looked at Yuan Kongye's cold face, and his eyes revealed an unconcealable warmth. That was a love that could not be expressed directly, but was deeply hidden in the heart. Yuan Kongye did not reject Zhang Yixian's proposal. Even though she knew that this might be a trap, compared to her great wish, no one was not expendable. Yuan Kongye walked over and gently hugged Zhang Yixian's body. "Only you treat me the best." A few minutes later, Zhang Yixian left the church. He summoned the few remaining priests and fathers of the sect, and after briefly explaining the current situation, he called his generals to assist him on his journey. 3 of them had to stay behind, the rest could come along. Basically, all the combat forces that could be dispatched were brought by Zhang Yixian. With the current state of the sect, only one place was still worth protecting. And as for the person he cares about most, no one needs to protect her anymore. So, without ordinary soldiers, they drove towards the coordinate of Radiant Prosperity Base. Meanwhile, at Radiant Prosperity Base, Xiao Honglian was waiting outside with some soldiers for the investigation team. With the little time given, she had managed to quickly arrange for everyone to hide in the shelter. Bian Zhenwu and his team drove their modified van and quickly approached the base with a grand entrance. From a distance, Xiao Honglian and her men saw the raging snowstorm on the snowfield, surging from the end of the horizon. They had never seen such a scene before. Even though they had fought against the zombie tide before, the zombie tide they encountered had never been as violent as today. Damn it! What kind of thing did they provoke? Xiao Honglian's face also showed a look of fear. With their remaining combat power, it is absolutely impossible to deal with such a huge zombie tide. The black modified van drove into the Radiant Prosperity Base, and Xiao Honglian immediately led her men at the entrance, shouting, "Quick, come here!" The van immediately drove in the direction indicated by Xiao Honglian. With the gates opened, the van did not stop and quickly made its way in. Bian Zhenwu, Bailey Chongqing, and Kong Sheng jumped down with weapons in their hands. Hide in the shelter quickly, the zombies behind are too big. Xiao Honglian and the others had already seen it without them having to explain. The zombies followed closely, covering the sky and the ground, and will soon cover all the space around the refinery. With the tide's current number and aggression, Xiao Honglian felt like she was being stabbed with a sharp knife. She knew that, one way or the other, her refinery was completely finished. Once the battlefield was determined to be here, the entire refinery would definitely be destroyed. But now was not the time to think of such things. Hurry up, we must hide immediately. Xiao Honglian could not think of resisting at all. Fighting against this scale of zombies was simply courting death. Everyone currently outside the doors killed some of the zombies in the front, and then quickly retreated. At the entrance of the shelter, several soldiers guarded the gate and shouted loudly, "Hurry! Come in!" Meng Xiu drove the van into the shelter. Then Bian Junwu and the rest cleared some of the zombies that followed, and quickly jumped into the gate. Xiao Honglian gave an order to close the extremely heavy door of the shelter. It was a door made of 7 thick alloys. Once it was closed, no matter how large the zombie tide was, it would be impossible to break through. Not long after everyone hid in the shelter, the land was completely occupied by the zombie tide. They smelled the breath of the living, so they kept roaring and howling in the sky at the other side, and desperately attacked the door. And all this could be seen through the surveillance inside the shelter. Everyone, including Bian Junwu, breathed a sigh of relief. Bian Junwu noticed that Xiao Honglian's face was very ugly. After all, the base that she had worked so hard to build for so long was destroyed in an instant. How could she be happy? Bian Junwu said to her, "I have notified Zhang Yi, Xing Tian, Wei Dinghai and the people of the Snow Worship sect. They will soon bring people to help us. Then we can work together inside and outside to eliminate the zombie tide outside." Xiao Honglian slams the center console in frustration. She didn't need that false reassurance at the moment, because judging from the scale of the zombie tide outside, it is no less than the level they faced in the camp of the Snow Worship sect that day. But now, their combat effectiveness is less than half of what it was before. How can we fight? Can't you apply for support from the Jiangnan region? Xiao Honglian stared at Bian Junwu and asked with a serious expression. Bian Junwu replied in his usual cold tone, "It's not that easy to transfer people from the Jiangnan region. Basically, every investigation team has a mission, and you can't just transfer people around. If you really need to transfer people, you need instructions from the higher-ups." Indeed, factually speaking, Bian Junwu and his investigation team were one of the best combat forces in the Jiangnan region. And at present, it was a given that the problems they couldn't solve were not things that could be solved by transferring other teams, unless a large force is mobilized to come and annihilate the zombie tide. But to do so, it is necessary to get instructions from the highest level of the Jiangnan region, which is much more troublesome. Then what should we do? Are we supposed to just wait here to die? Xiao Honglian closed her eyes, her tone somewhat helpless. Did she blame the investigation team? There seemed to be no reason to blame them. After all, the zombie crisis itself was a problem that Tianhai City had to face on its own. Even if the investigation team had not come, they would have to solve these problems sooner or later. So she could not complain about them coming to help. She just felt a little sad. Meng Xiu turned on the computer and quickly obtained the footage outside the shelter through the satellite system. This is the situation outside. Bian Junwu, Xiao Honglian and the others came to the computer to check the scene outside. Looking down from a high altitude, the entire refinery has been completely occupied by dense swarms of zombies. That feeling is like a farmland full of locusts. People with intensive phobia will have an attack of the disease just by looking at it. Well, now none of us can get out. Xiao Honglian said this with her arms folded as she sighed helplessly. Radiant Prosperity Base was completely engulfed by the zombie tide, and they were roaring and gathering outside the underground shelter of the base. They used various methods to attack the gate of the shelter. Fortunately, this was a military base prepared for war. Even if they attacked with missiles, they had to go through multiple rounds of bombing. With the simple offensive means of these zombies, they could not pose a threat at all. This gave the people in the shelter a chance to breathe a sigh of relief. However, judging from the current situation, it would be too difficult to get out of the shelter. Although the investigation team was composed of elite soldiers, they could only deal with tens of thousands of zombies at most. However, there were hundreds of thousands of zombies outside, and there were a large number of bronze-armored zombies with combat power comparable to that of mutants, as well as bronze-armored flying zombies that could fly. Together, they would definitely not be able to defeat these things. Bian Junwu frowned slightly, and he suddenly covered his mouth and coughed violently. "Boss! Captain, are you okay?" The subordinates next to him, Wu Di and Bailey Chongqing, looked at Bien Junwoo with concern. Bien Junwoo waved his hand. It's okay. Now it seems that we have to rely on outside forces. A smile suddenly appeared on the corner of his mouth, although the blood there had not been wiped clean. Now that they are gathered together, we can apply to the headquarters for airstrike support. Xiao Honglian was refreshed. Do you mean to say that we can let the Jiangnan district launch missiles here? Nothing is more useful than a missile. Great. One missile will turn hundreds of thousands of zombies outside into ashes. Bien Junwoo nodded. At this point, this is the only way. They were forced into a desperate situation. They had no way to clean up such a large-scale zombie tide. Although Bien Junwoo was very proud, he would not joke about the lives of himself and his companions.